Funny how the quiet ones are always the easiest to laugh at, until they're not. The man said loudly, leaning back in his chair as the entire diner turned to watch, his voice dripping with smug amusement, while Ethan Cole stood there in worn jeans and a faded jacket, his 6-year-old daughter Lily clutching his hand as if she could feel the tension crawling through the room, and beside them the waitress, Charlotte, stood frozen with a tray in her hands, her apology barely above a whisper as the man waved her off like she didn't exist. "You people always mess things up," he added, shaking his head while a few scattered chuckles rippled through the air, sharp and careless. And Ethan didn't react at first, didn't raise his voice, didn't step forward. He just stood there, still, like a man who had learned that dignity didn't need noise to be real. "It's okay," Charlotte murmured, eyes lowered. But her fingers trembled just enough to betray the weight she was carrying, and Lily tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve, her small voice soft but clear. "Daddy, why is he being mean?" The question hung there, simple and honest, cutting through the room in a way no argument ever could, and Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze lifting, not angry, not proud, just steady. "Sometimes people forget what respect looks like," he said quietly. Then he stepped forward, just one step, calm, measured, and placed a few folded bills on the table. More than enough to cover the meal, more than enough to say what words didn't need to. "She did her job," Ethan added, his voice even, almost gentle. "Maybe it's time we all do ours," the man scoffed, shaking his head. "Who do you think you are?" He shot back, louder now, drawing more attention, more eyes, more judgment. But Ethan didn't answer right away. He simply turned to Charlotte, meeting her eyes for the first time. And there was something there, something quiet but unshakable. "You don't owe anyone an apology for doing your best," he said. And for a moment the noise in the diner softened. Not gone, but changed, like the air before a storm decides whether it will break or pass. Charlotte blinked, caught off guard, not by the words, but by the way they were given, without expectation, without performance, just respect. And the man laughed again, louder this time, trying to reclaim the room. "This is unbelievable," he muttered, waving his hand dismissively. But something had already shifted, subtle, almost invisible, like a current beneath still water, and Ethan turned back to his daughter, kneeling slightly to her level, his voice warm again, untouched by the moment that had just passed. "Come on, kiddo, we've got places to be." And as they walked toward the door, no applause followed, no dramatic silence, just a lingering feeling in the room, like something important had happened and no one quite knew how to name it, except Charlotte, who stood there watching him leave, her heart steadying in a way it hadn't all day. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had chosen kindness when it would have been easier to walk away, and she didn't know yet who Ethan Cole really was. But she knew this much. He was not someone the world would laugh at for long. The bell above the diner door gave a soft chime as Ethan stepped out into the cool evening air, the kind that carried the faint scent of rain and asphalt. And Lily skipped beside him, her small hand still wrapped around his. "Daddy, was she okay?" she asked, glancing back through the glass where Charlotte still stood, and Ethan paused for a moment, looking at the reflection instead of the room. "She will be," he said gently, though something in his voice carried a weight that suggested he knew the world was not always that simple. And as they walked down the sidewalk, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows that stretched behind them like quiet reminders of everything he carried without ever speaking about it. Back inside the diner, Charlotte had not moved, her fingers still resting against the edge of the table where Ethan had placed the money, not because of the amount, but because of the way it was given, steady, without expectation, without performance. "Who does that?" one of the other servers whispered nearby, but Charlotte did not answer, her mind replaying the moment again and again. The calm in his eyes, the absence of pride, the kind of strength that did not need to announce itself. And slowly she set the tray down, her breathing evening out as something unfamiliar settled in her chest. Not shock, not embarrassment, but something quieter, something closer to respect, the kind that lingers long after the noise fades. Across town, Ethan's small apartment welcomed them with its usual silence. A modest place on the second floor with creaky steps and warm lights spilling from a single lamp in the living room. Lily kicked off her shoes and ran to the couch. Her laughter soft but real, and Ethan watched her for a moment before setting his keys down on the counter, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic, like a man who had built his life on small, steady habits instead of grand gestures. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice hopeful, and Ethan smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both promise and calculation. "We will see," he replied, knowing exactly how much was left in his wallet, knowing exactly what it meant to stretch a dollar just a little further, and yet somehow still choosing to make room for small joys because that was what mattered, not the noise of the world, not the judgment of strangers, but the quiet moments that no one else ever saw. Back at the diner, Charlotte finished her shift without speaking much, her coworkers filling the silence with chatter that felt distant, unimportant, and when she finally stepped outside, the night air felt different, cooler, clearer, like something had shifted in a way she could not explain. She glanced down the street, as if expecting to see him still there. But of course he was gone. Just another quiet man walking away from a moment that would have meant everything to someone else. And for the first time in a long time, Charlotte Hayes felt something she had not planned for. Not control, not certainty, but curiosity, the kind that does not demand answers, only attention. And somewhere deep inside, beneath everything she had built, something stirred softly, like a question she was not ready to ask because she had seen power before. She had lived inside it, shaped it, commanded it. But what she had seen tonight was something else entirely, something quieter, something rarer, and she could not ignore it anymore. Some people walk away and never look back, but some leave a mark you cannot ignore. The thought lingered in Charlotte's mind the next morning as sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the diner, casting soft gold across the worn floors and chip counters. And for the first time since she had started working there, she arrived early, not out of obligation, but out of something quieter, something she could not quite name, the kind of pull that did not demand attention but refused to fade. She tied her apron slowly, her movements more deliberate than usual, as if she were trying to stay grounded in a place that suddenly felt different. "You are here early," one of the cooks said with a raised eyebrow, and she offered a small nod, her eyes drifting toward the door without meaning to, as if expecting something that logic told her would not come. Across town, Ethan was already awake before the sun had fully risen, standing at the small stove, flipping pancakes with careful precision, the scent of butter filling the apartment as Lily sat at the table swinging her legs, her laughter soft and bright. "You said maybe," she reminded him, and he smiled faintly, placing a plate in front of her. "Maybe can still mean yes," he replied, his voice warm, steady, and for a moment the world outside did not exist. No judgment, no noise, just a father keeping a quiet promise in a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. Later that morning, the diner filled with its usual rhythm, coffee machines humming, plates clinking, conversations overlapping in a steady hum of everyday life. But Charlotte moved through it differently now, more aware, more present. Every small interaction carrying a weight it had not before. And then the door chimed, soft, familiar, and her breath caught just slightly before she could stop it. Ethan stepped inside with Lily beside him, his posture the same as always, calm, unassuming, like he belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. "Morning," he said simply as he approached the counter, not expecting recognition, not expecting anything at all, and Charlotte felt something shift again, subtle but undeniable. "Good morning," she replied, her voice steady but softer than before, and for a brief second their eyes met, not long enough to draw attention, but long enough to carry meaning. "Same as yesterday?" she asked, and Ethan nodded. "If it is not too much trouble," he added, and the words were simple, but the way he said them made them feel different, like respect was not something he gave occasionally, but something he lived inside of. As she poured his coffee, her hands no longer trembled. Instead, there was a quiet focus, a stillness that replaced the uncertainty from before. Lily smiled up at her. "He always says thank you," she said proudly, and Charlotte smiled back. Something genuine this time, something unguarded. "That is a good habit," she replied, and as Ethan sat down, the room continued around them, unchanged on the surface. But beneath it something had begun to take shape, something neither of them named. Something built not from grand gestures, but from small moments repeated with intention. And as Charlotte walked away to place their order, she realized something she had not expected. She was not curious about who Ethan had been, or what he might become. She was curious about who he already was, because whatever it was, it did not ask for attention. It did not demand recognition. And yet somehow, it was impossible to ignore. Respect is quiet. But arrogance always needs an audience. The voice of the man cut sharply through the diner once again, louder than necessary, as if the room existed just to echo him. And Ethan looked up slowly from his coffee, while Lily froze mid-bite, her small hand still wrapped around her fork. And Charlotte felt it before she turned, that same tension returning, heavier this time, more deliberate. The man from before stood near the counter now, dressed in pressed slacks and confidence that leaned just slightly into entitlement. "I see nothing has changed," he said with a smirk, glancing between Charlotte and Ethan like they were part of a joke he had already decided was funny. A few customers shifted uncomfortably, sensing something was about to unfold. But no one spoke, no one intervened, because moments like this often belong to whoever was loudest. "You still defending people who cannot even get an order right?" he added, his tone light but pointed. And Charlotte straightened her posture, her voice calm, controlled. "Your order will be ready in a moment, sir," she said, choosing professionalism over reaction. But the man chuckled, shaking his head. "That is not the point," he replied, tapping the counter with slow, deliberate rhythm. "The point is knowing your place." The words lingered, heavy, uncomfortable, and Lily looked up at Ethan, her eyes searching. But Ethan did not move right away. He simply set his cup down gently, the ceramic barely making a sound. And for a moment, it seemed like nothing would happen at all, like the silence would stretch and swallow the moment whole. "There is no place assigned to dignity," Ethan said finally, his voice low but clear, not raised, not forced, just present. And the man laughed again, louder this time, drawing more attention, more eyes. "You really believe that?" he asked, turning slightly so others could hear, as if inviting them to share in the moment. But something had shifted in the room, subtle but undeniable. The laughter did not follow the way it had before. It hesitated, fractured, uncertain. Charlotte felt it too. That quiet change, like the balance of something invisible tipping just slightly. "I do not need everyone to believe it," Ethan replied, meeting the man's gaze without challenge, without fear, just enough to live by it. There was no anger in his words, no attempt to win, only a steady truth that did not bend to the noise around it. And for a brief second the man faltered, not visibly, not enough to admit it, but enough that his next words came a fraction slower. "You think that makes you better?" he asked, and Ethan shook his head lightly. "No," he said, "it just keeps me from becoming worse." The air shifted again, quieter now, heavier in a different way, and Charlotte realized something she had not expected. The room was not watching the man anymore. It was watching Ethan, not because he demanded it, but because he did not. Lily squeezed his hand under the table, a small, grounding gesture, and Ethan gave her a faint smile, steady as ever, as if nothing about this moment had the power to change who he was. And the man exhaled sharply, looking around as if searching for the reaction he expected but could not quite find. "Unbelievable," he muttered, straightening his jacket as he stepped back. But the weight of the moment did not leave with him. It stayed, lingering in the quiet spaces between conversations. In the way people avoided meeting each other's eyes, in the way Charlotte stood a little taller without realizing it. And as Ethan picked up his cup again, as if the moment had already passed for him, something settled over the room. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, like a truth that did not need to be announced to be understood. The strongest connections are not built in moments of noise, but in the quiet spaces people choose to stay. The afternoon light stretched across the diner floor as the rush began to fade, leaving behind the soft hum of dishes being cleared and conversations settling into low murmurs. And Ethan remained at his seat a little longer than usual, not out of need, but out of something unspoken. Lily beside him drawing small shapes on a paper napkin with a borrowed pen, her world simple, untouched by the weight adults carried. Charlotte approached with a fresh cup of coffee, though his was not yet empty. "I thought you might want a refill," she said, her tone calm. But there was intention behind it now, not just service, and Ethan looked up, noticing it, not surprised, just aware. "Thank you," he replied, his voice steady as always. And for a moment neither of them moved away, the space between them quiet but not empty. "You always do that," Charlotte said softly, almost to herself, and Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Do what?" he asked, and she hesitated, searching for the right words, something she was not used to doing. "Stay calm." "Even when people are not," she answered, and Ethan gave a faint smile, the kind that carried more understanding than explanation. "It is easier that way," he said, and she shook her head lightly. "No, it is not," she replied, more certain now. And that was when something shifted again, not in the room, but between them, a small bridge forming where there had only been distance before. Lily looked up from her drawing, holding it out proudly. "This is you," she said to Charlotte, the lines simple, uneven, but full of intention, and Charlotte blinked in surprise before kneeling slightly to meet her. "That is beautiful," she said, her voice softer than it had been all day, and Ethan watched quietly, something in his expression easing, not guarded, not distant, just present. "She draws what she feels," he added, and Charlotte glanced at him, holding the paper a little more carefully now, as if it carried more than just ink. "Then I must have made a good impression," she said with a small smile, and Lily nodded seriously. "You are nice," she replied, simple, certain, and the honesty of it lingered in the air longer than expected. Outside the diner, the sky had begun to shift toward evening, the light turning warmer, softer, like the world itself was slowing down, and inside, something equally quiet was unfolding. Not dramatic, not obvious, but steady. Charlotte straightened, brushing her apron lightly, as if grounding herself again. "Do you come here every day?" she asked, and Ethan nodded once. "Most days," he said, and she took that in, not as information, but as something she would remember, something that mattered. "Then I will see you again," she said, and it was not a question, not quite a statement either, but something in between, something that carried both hope and certainty, and Ethan met her gaze for a brief moment, long enough to acknowledge it, not long enough to change it. "You will," he replied simply, and as Charlotte walked away, the noise of the diner returned, but it no longer felt the same, because somewhere between a cup of coffee and a child's drawing, something had begun that neither of them had planned, something that did not announce itself, did not demand attention, but quietly, steadily, refused to be ignored. Sometimes the most important moments are the ones that disappear without warning. The words settled quietly into the rhythm of the next few days as Ethan continued to walk through the diner doors each morning at nearly the same time, Lily beside him with her small routines, her drawings, her soft laughter filling the space in ways no one else seemed to notice, but Charlotte did. She noticed everything now, the way Ethan always thanked her even when she had not done anything yet, the way he folded his napkin before leaving, the way he listened when Lily spoke as if her words mattered more than anything else in the room. And in those quiet repetitions, something steady began to form, not rushed, not dramatic, but real. "You are early again," Charlotte said one morning, placing his coffee down before he even asked, and Ethan gave a small nod. "Work starts earlier this week," he replied, and she tilted her head slightly. "What do you do?" she asked, not out of curiosity alone, but because she realized she did not know, and for some reason that mattered now. Ethan paused for a brief moment, as if choosing how much to say. "Maintenance," he answered simply, and she nodded, accepting it without pressing further, though something in her expression suggested she knew there was more beneath that single word, but she did not chase it because whatever it was, it would reveal itself in time or not at all. And for the first time in a long time, she was comfortable with not knowing. Later that day, the diner felt quieter than usual, not empty, but different, as if the absence of something had changed the air itself. Charlotte moved through her shift with the same care, the same presence, but her eyes drifted to the door more often than she intended, each chime drawing a flicker of expectation that quickly faded. And as the hours passed, a subtle realization began to settle in. Ethan had not come back. Not that day. Not the next. And the absence was not loud. It did not demand attention, but it lingered in the spaces he used to fill, in the empty seat by the window, in the untouched rhythm of a morning she had started to recognize. "You okay? Hey?" Coworker asked, noticing her distraction, and Charlotte gave a small, controlled smile. "Of course," she replied, but the answer felt incomplete even as she said it, because something had shifted again, only this time it was not presence that created it. It was absence. And across town, Ethan's routine had changed in ways no one at the diner could see. Longer hours, fewer mornings free. Responsibilities that did not ask for permission before arriving. Lily still laughed, still drew, but the quiet moments had grown tighter, more carefully managed. And yet nothing about him felt different. Not in the way he spoke, not in the way he carried himself. Still steady, still grounded, as if the weight he carried had simply become part of who he was, not something to be questioned. Back at the diner, Charlotte stood by the counter as the evening light faded, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper Lily had given her days before, still tucked safely near the register. And for a moment she allowed herself to feel it fully, the absence, the quiet question it left behind. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just present, like a door that had opened briefly and then closed without explanation. And she realized something then, something simple but undeniable. She did not miss the routine. She missed the person, the quiet way he had existed in the space without asking for anything, without needing to be seen. And that realization stayed with her long after the lights dimmed and the diner emptied. Because for the first time, she found herself wondering not where he had gone, but whether he would come back at all. The truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in and changes everything without a single warning. The morning carried a different kind of energy as Charlotte stepped out of a black car that no one at the diner had ever seen before, the city skyline reflecting off its polished surface while the driver waited in quiet professionalism. And for a moment she stood still, not as the waitress everyone knew, but as someone else entirely, someone who had been hidden in plain sight, inside the towering glass building across town. The atmosphere was nothing like the diner, polished floors, measured footsteps, voices controlled and precise. And at the center of it all stood Charlotte Hayes. No apron, no tray, just quiet authority wrapped in calm composure. "The board is waiting," a man in a tailored suit said, and she nodded once, her expression unreadable, as she stepped into the room where decisions were made in numbers too large to feel. Yet even there, surrounded by power, something remained unsettled, something that did not belong to that world. "We need your final approval," another voice added, sliding documents across the table. And Charlotte glanced at them briefly, but her mind was elsewhere, not distracted, just aware of a different kind of weight, one that did not come from contracts or control. And as the meeting moved forward, efficient, structured, predictable, she realized something quietly. She had mastered this world long ago, but it no longer held her attention the way it once did. Because somewhere between a cup of coffee and a quiet man who asked for nothing, something had shifted inside her that power could not replace. Later that afternoon, the diner continued as it always had, unchanged, unaware of the distance between the two worlds that had just existed side by side. Charlotte stepped inside again, this time dressed as before, simple, unremarkable, blending back into the rhythm of clinking dishes and casual conversation. But something about her presence had changed, not visible, not obvious, just deeper, more certain, as if she was no longer observing that space, but choosing it. And as she tied her apron once more, her eyes moved instinctively toward the door, not with expectation, but with intention, as if she already knew what needed to happen next. Across town, Ethan stood outside a building far larger than anything he usually stepped into, his reflection faint in the glass as he adjusted his jacket, not out of nervousness, but out of respect for the space he was about to enter. Lily stood beside him, holding his hand, her eyes wide as she looked up at the height of the structure. "Daddy, this place is huge," she whispered, And Ethan gave a small nod. "It is," he replied, his voice calm as always, and a moment later the doors opened, welcoming them into a world that did not match the simplicity they carried with them. Inside, people moved quickly, purposefully, their attention fixed on schedules and screens. But as Ethan stepped forward, something subtle happened. Not loud, not immediate, but noticeable, a shift in the air, as if the presence of someone who did not belong there had quietly demanded to be seen. And somewhere above, beyond polished glass and closed doors, Charlotte Hayes paused mid-step, her gaze lifting slightly, not because she had heard anything, but because something told her the moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived. And this time, it would not pass quietly. Some choices do not just change a moment. They reveal who you have been all along. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime as Ethan stepped onto the polished floor, Lily's small hand still in his, her eyes wide as she looked around at the towering ceilings and quiet luxury, and the receptionist glanced up briefly, her expression polite but measured. "Can I help you?" she asked, and Ethan nodded calmly. "I was told to come here this morning," he said, his voice steady, not uncertain, just simple, and she checked her screen before pausing, her posture shifting slightly. "Please, wait a moment," she replied, and as she made a call, the subtle change in her tone did not go unnoticed. Not by Ethan, not by the few employees passing through the lobby. Something in the air tightening just enough to suggest this was not an ordinary visit. Upstairs, the boardroom doors opened quietly as Charlotte stepped out, her expression composed, but her pace just a fraction quicker than before. "Cancel the next meeting," she said without hesitation, and the assistant blinked in surprise. "But the investors, they can wait," Charlotte replied, her voice calm but final. And for the first time that day, her focus was not on numbers, not on strategy, but on something far more certain, something she had already decided before anyone else realized the decision had been made. Back in the lobby, Ethan knelt slightly to Lily's level. "Stay close, okay?" he said gently, and she nodded, trusting him without question, just as the elevator doors opened again, and Charlotte Hayes stepped out, not as the waitress they knew, not as the CO they feared, but as both at once, her presence quiet yet undeniable. Conversation slowed, footsteps softened, and one by one, eyes turned toward her, then toward Ethan, then back again, trying to understand what they were seeing. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice warm, steady, and unmistakably directed at him. And the room shifted again, this time not with uncertainty, but with realization. Ethan stood, meeting her gaze without hesitation, not surprised, not impressed, just present, as if the title she carried did not change what he had already seen in her. "You asked me to come," he replied simply, and Charlotte nodded, stepping closer, her expression softening in a way no one in that building had ever witnessed. "I did," she said, and for a brief moment the silence deepened, not empty, but full, like something important was about to be understood. The receptionist straightened, employees paused mid-step, even the distant hum of conversation seemed to fade, and Charlotte looked at Ethan, not as a CEO addressing a visitor, but as a woman making a choice she had already made in her heart. "There are easier paths," she said quietly, "paths that come with power, with expectation, with everything the world says should matter." She paused, just long, enough for the weight of those words to settle. "But none of them feel as real as this," she continued, her voice unwavering. And Ethan listened, not interrupting, not reacting, just allowing the moment to unfold as it was meant to. Lily looked between them, sensing something she could not yet fully understand but knew was important, and Charlotte took one final step closer, her decision no longer hidden behind titles or distance. "I choose what is real," she said, her gaze steady on Ethan. "And I choose you." The words were not loud, not dramatic, but they carried through the room with a clarity that no one could ignore. And in that moment, the balance of everything shifted, not because of power, not because of status, but because someone who had everything had chosen something else entirely. And the silence that followed was not confusion, not disbelief, but understanding. In the end, it is not the loudest moment that defines a life, It is the quiet choice that follows. The silence in the lobby did not break with applause or whispers. It simply settled, deep and still, as if every person present understood that something real had just happened, something they could not interrupt. Ethan stood there with the same calm he had carried into every room before, his posture unchanged, his expression steady, as if the weight of her words did not inflate him, did not alter him, but simply met him where he already was. Lily looked up at him, then at Charlotte, her small voice cutting gently through the quiet. "Does this mean she is coming with us?" And for the first time, a soft ripple of warmth moved through the space. Not laughter, not disbelief, but something lighter, something human. Ethan knelt slightly beside her, his voice low and kind. "It means she gets to decide what comes next," he said, as Charlotte smiled at that. Not the practiced smile of a leader, but something softer, something real. "I already did," she replied, her eyes meeting Lily's with a gentleness that no boardroom had ever seen. And then she turned back to Ethan, not as someone above him, not as someone offering him a place in her world, but as someone stepping into his. "If you will let me," she added quietly, and Ethan held her gaze for a moment, long enough to understand the weight of what she was leaving behind. Not just the title, not just the building, but the expectations that came with it. And he gave a small nod, not dramatic, not hesitant, just certain. "You do not have to ask for a place you have already earned," he said, and those words lingered longer than anything else that had been spoken, because they carried truth without pride, respect without condition. And in that moment, Charlotte Hayes was no longer defined by what she owned, but by what she chose. Around them the world slowly resumed. Footsteps continued. Voices returned. But nothing felt the same, because the measure of power had shifted, not upward, but inward. And as they walked toward the exit together, Lily between them, holding both their hands as if it had always been that way. The glass doors opened to the afternoon light, warm and steady, the city moving on as it always did, unaware that something extraordinary had just passed quietly through it. No headlines, no announcements, just a man who never needed to prove his worth, and a woman who finally understood what it meant. And as they stepped outside, leaving behind the polished floors and silent expectations, the world did not stop. It did not celebrate. It simply continued. But for those who had witnessed it, something remained. A quiet reminder that dignity does not demand attention. It earns it. And sometimes, when it is finally seen, the loudest room in the world can do nothing but fall silent.